And I have prepared a video for the first part of the homily. Courage and resistance for hundreds of years. Sometimes that looks like fighting back when you take a hit. Sometimes that looks like showing up at a march. Sometimes that looks like creating music and art. Sometimes that looks like donating resources. And sometimes that looks like finding your people and celebrating together. Sometimes that looks like quietly living your life and surviving. Sometimes that looks like finding yourself, giving up, and finding yourself again. Sometimes that looks like struggling with all your might and still being mowed down by the powers of hate and oppression. And sometimes that looks like getting into government or the law to make changes. And sometimes that looks like showing up for someone who is hurting. Pride. We need each one of us to survive. The Stonewall uprisings began June 28th in the wee hours, and there were protests through July 3rd, 1969. They say the first gay pride was a riot. Miss Major Griffin Gracie had come out as trans when she was a teenager. And on June 27th, she met some friends at the Stonewall Inn in New York City. In the wee hours that night, the bar was raided by police and she was swept up into the Stonewall uprising. Stormy DeLavery grew up in New Orleans. Stormy was the first to fight back at Stonewall. She was arrested and handcuffed for wearing men's clothes. When she complained that the cuffs were too tight, a police officer struck her in the head with his baton. Stormy, cuffed though she was, responded by hitting the cop so hard he started bleeding. She famously shouted to the other Stonewall patrons, "Why don't you guys do something?" That outburst emboldened the crowd to fight back themselves. Marsha Pantomime Johnson was a drag queen and is a lifelong activist. They are still the most recognizable figure from the Stonewall riots and protests. But pride didn't begin in the 1960s. Daniel J. and William Dorsey Swan, born enslaved, held drag balls in Washington, D.C. in an 1888 raid. William became the first LGBTQ person in the USA to fight back. The work of pride has not ended. We are fabulous and fierce. Paris Dupree hosted an annual ball called Paris is Burning, for which the famous 1990 documentary on the ball scene is named. Elle Hearns began her activism career as a youth organizer in Ohio and co-founded the Black Lives Matter Global Network. We need each one of us to survive, and we all need ease and abundance. Ruth Ellis, her parents were formerly enslaved, and she came out as a lesbian when she was 16 years old, to the complete acceptance of her family. Mother George was the child of a Black man and a Native woman. She served as a midwife in Idaho until her death, when it was discovered she had been assigned male at birth. Lucy Hicks Anderson was assigned male at birth, but was adamant that she was a girl from a very early age. Luckily for Lucy, her parents and doctors fully supported her gender transition. We need each one of us to shine. We need art and artists. James Baldwin, his influential works include Notes of a Native Son and Giovanni's Room, both of which featured Black LGBTQ characters. Wilmer Broadnax was a well-known gospel singer active through 1965, and it was only after his death that the public discovered that Wilmer had been assigned female at birth. Gladys Bentley, a child rejected for being an overweight tomboy, she made it as a singer-pianist in Harlem. And she never hid the fact that she was a lesbian and was happy to tell the press that she had married a white woman. Richard Bruce Nugent, his short story, Smoke, Lilies, and Jade, is considered to be the first work by a Black American to openly depict homosexuality. He also found success as an illustrator, dancer, and drag performer. Billy Strayhorn is the author of Take the A Train and many other hits. Billy was involved in the civil rights movement, and Billy died of cancer in the arms of his partner, Bill Grove. Josephine Baker, after dancing her way to stardom in Paris from impoverished beginnings, in 1927, she became the first Black woman to star in a major motion picture anywhere in the world, Siren of the Tropics. Sister Rosetta Tharpe, Rolling Stone called her a queer Black woman from Arkansas who shredded on electric guitar, belted praises both to God and secular pleasures, and broke the color line touring with white singers. She was gospel's first superstar. And Bob Dylan said she was a big, good-looking woman and divine, not to mention sublime and splendid. She was a powerful force of nature, a guitar-playing, singing evangelist. Audre Lorde described herself as a Black lesbian feminist mother, poet, warrior, and made lasting contributions in the fields of feminist theory, critical race studies, and queer theory through her pedagogy and writing. We need each one of us to lead. We need change makers. Bayard Rustin, he organized protections for the property of Japanese Americans imprisoned in internment camps, pressured President Franklin Roosevelt to pass the Fair Employment Act, worked with Martin Luther King, and fought to desegregate the nation's buses, and so much more. Ernestine Eckstein. Eckstein was a leader in the New York chapter of Daughters of Bilitis, the first lesbian rights organization in the USA. She viewed the fight for civil rights and LGBTQ rights as intrinsically linked. Andrea Jenkins, well, she won 73% of the vote in Minneapolis on November 7th, 2017, to become the first Black openly transgender woman ever elected to public office in the United States. Kyler Broadus was assigned female at birth. Kyler lost his job when he transitioned, so he became a lawyer to fight for LGBTQ plus protections. Robert Jordan, in 1972, ran for a seat in the U.S. House of Representatives and won with 81% of the vote, making her the first Black American from the South elected to Congress since 1898. Phil Wilson, after decades of activism and charity work, President Obama appointed him to the Advisory Council on HIV/AIDS in 2010. We need each one of us to love. We need community, and we need care. Reverend Naomi Washington Leapart is an ordained minister affiliated with the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries. And Abby Stein says, one of the strongest things I learned after transitioning as a proud Jewish ordained queer woman of trans experience was that the rainbow of my identities don't just go together, but they enhance each other in a beautiful way. Reggie Williams learned of AIDS while an X-ray technician. In 1985, his networking helped create the National Task Force on AIDS Prevention to expand education and health access among Black men. The Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams, Sensei, says, being queer identified has long been the underpinning of my impulse to explore identity, which was aided by Buddhist practice. This in turn informs my commitment to challenge anything that would deny our fundamental right to connection and compassion between each other and the planet. We need each one of us to thrive. Well, you can sit back down after dancing. I landed at the tiny airport in Ithaca, New York, tired from a week in Minnesota, celebrating my cousin's wedding. It was 2004, and my sweetie and I had been registered domestic partners and had a religious wedding, but we were still denied the rights and privileges of heterosexual couples. So it was a little bittersweet to see friends, family, and their whole Minnesota Lutheran family celebrating my cousin and his wife. I was tired of microaggressions, discrimination, and just plain feeling like our relationship didn't matter. Tired and sad and angry that I didn't feel like my life partner would be welcome at the event. Earlier that year, I had just started to attend the local Unitarian Universalist congregation. So there I was, tired and grumpy and sad, dragging my way toward the luggage carousel. I glanced over and recognized the face of the UUA president, Sinkford, above the fold on the paper in the newsstand. Hey, I voted for him. What's the headline? Do you remember this moment in history? The central office, had hung a banner out the window overlooking Boston Commons, declaring that this faith, our faith, cared about marriage equality. And that moment began to heal the hole that had been ripped into my soul when I fell in love with my high school best friend and realized the scornful whispers in my Methodist home congregation applied to me. Reading the UUA banner, I felt myself grow a few inches. I remembered the ways I'd been cut down for liking pretty dresses in radical lesbian community, felt excluded from the traditional great right and lord and lady language in pagan community, and I knew I was finally home. My faith needed me to survive. My faith needed me to be whole. My faith needed me to thrive. And that moment has rippled through my life. It took many more years before the entire nation legalized the freedom to marry. Years of work and relationship building, years during which I left my university 9-to-5 job and became a UU minister. I campaigned door to door for freedom to marry in Oregon. My spouse transitioned. And many years in which I watched my fellow UU struggle to live our inclusive message. It matters when we declare our support, when we live our pride in banners and celebrations, when we show up for the marginalized. We have no idea how far-reaching each choice may be. The choice to respect someone's pronouns could save their life. The choice to listen to someone's story could give them permission to fall in love. The choice to show up at a march could help heal someone's spiritual injury from their childhood faith. The choice to change a flag could make a movement stronger. The rainbow flag was commissioned for the first Gay Pride March in San Francisco and created by Gilbert Baker and Lynn Segerblum. The original flag included pink and turquoise, but those colors were dropped due to a shortage of fabric. The designer selected a rainbow because the rainbow shows up in earliest recorded history as a symbol of hope. In the biblical story of Noah, God displays a rainbow as proof of a covenant between God and all living creatures. It's also found in Chinese, Egyptian, and Native American history, and because it was used by Allen Ginsberg, a gay hippie influencer, as a peace flag. The Progress Pride flag was designed by Daniel Quasar of Portland in response to awareness of the way queer people of color and trans people had been left behind by the gay pride movement. Let me show you that flag. After he learned about a flag in Philadelphia with black and brown stripes to explicitly lift up Black, Indigenous, and people of color, he also added the turquoise, pink, and white flag adopted by trans folks. It's taken years for the LGBTQ plus movement to get on board with including all the people in the community. Of course, it's still a work in progress, just like in every UU congregation. But then we're all works in progress, right? We are all divine, and we could all use a little work. Pride this year for me was a rainbow tie-dye shirt with nowhere to wear it. Of course, I can wear it anywhere, anytime, but it just isn't the same as those marches where I felt impossibly brave to be seen. When fists raised, we chanted shame, shame, shame at the president. Or the more recent Portland marches, where I realized that it's my turn to follow new voices rather than insist on my own voice. In this time of COVID-19, I miss my queer community's fierce gatherings of pride, persistence, resistance, and defiance. I long for each day to be not just another day, lest we forget those whose bodies our current privileges rest upon, our forebears. On the fateful night, the police had stopped by the Stonewall Inn to check for liquor law violations and other transgressions, something they did frequently. What actually occurred, as was often the case, was police intimidation and demands for payoffs in return for not arresting or publicizing the names of customers. Back in 1969, it was against the law to dress in the clothes of the opposite sex. Police procedure was to take any customer who was dressed as a woman into the women's bathroom to check for compliance. As the police raid continued, the crowds outside the Stonewall Inn grew. The patrons spilled out onto Christopher Street and gathered with other neighborhood gays, lesbians, trans folks, and their allies who had joined the now growing crowd. News of the riot had spread across the city. The group of angry demonstrators swelled in numbers, by some accounts by hundreds. When the additional police officer finally arrived, the crowd eventually dispersed, only to regroup and come back around another street. Behind the police officers from the other side, this back and forth of the crowd and the police continued well into the night before folks went home. The following night, the police came back again and the riots continued, and then the night after that. This time was different. Instead of the patrons doing what the police asked, they refused to back down. This dramatic turn of events changed the course of LGBTQ plus history. Folks resisted, folks mobilized, and the fight for LGBTQ plus equality was born. The Gay Liberation Front was formed in the wake of the riots to protest against the social oppression of the LGBTQ community. And then the first Pride March was held June 28, 1970. Barbara Howard, an activist known as the Mother of Pride for her work in coordinating the march. As we celebrate Pride, please take a moment to remember all the gays and lesbians, bisexuals, queer, Black people and people of color, transgender and gender nonconforming, and the allies who show up. As Frederick Douglass famously said, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. So let us continue to demand a world of love and justice. What they dreamed is ours to do. Happy Pride, everyone.